In a quiet suburban neighborhood, where tree-lined streets and manicured lawns gave the illusion of peace, tensions simmered just below the surface. The community had long been divided by unspoken biases, with whispers of unfair treatment from local law enforcement echoing through conversations. Among the residents was Special Agent Jordan Hayes, a highly respected black FBI agent known for her sharp mind and dedication to justice. She wasn't there as a resident, though. She was on a mission. Jordan sat in her car near a convenience store, her laptop open on the passenger seat. Her eyes scanned through files and photos, piecing together clues about a dangerous crime ring operating in the area. Dressed casually to blend in, she looked like any other person taking a break during their day. But what seemed ordinary to her would soon spiral into something extraordinary and deeply troubling. Across the street, Officer Karen Miller was patrolling the area. Known around town for her abrasive demeanor and controversial behavior, Karen often made headlines for traffic stops gone wrong or disputes with citizens who questioned her authority. Her reputation preceded her, especially among minority communities, where stories of her harsh tactics were shared in hushed tones. Today, however, fate had something unexpected in store for both women. As Karen drove past the convenience store, her gaze landed on Jordan's car. Sitting alone, laptop open, Jordan appeared focused on her work. To most people, this scene might have seemed harmless, a professional using her time wisely. But Karen's mind immediately jumped to conclusions. In her view, a black woman sitting in a parked car near a convenience store couldn't possibly be up to anything good. Without hesitation, she pulled over and approached Jordan's vehicle with an air of suspicion. Karen's presence was impossible to ignore. Her heavy footsteps echoed against the pavement as she walked toward the car, her hand resting on her utility belt. When she reached the driver's side window, she tapped loudly, demanding that Jordan roll it down. Startled but composed, Jordan complied, looking up at the officer with calm curiosity. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked politely, hoping to diffuse whatever concern had brought her here. But Karen wasn't interested in explanations. Her tone was sharp and accusatory as she demanded to know why Jordan was parked there. "What are you doing?" "This looks suspicious," Karen snapped, her voice carrying an edge of hostility. Jordan tried to explain that she was simply working, but Karen cut her off, refusing to listen. Each word from Jordan seemed to fuel Karen's frustration, and it quickly became clear that this wasn't about finding answers. It was about asserting control. The situation grew more tense with every passing moment. Karen continued to barrage Jordan with questions, ignoring her attempts to clarify the misunderstanding. Passers-by began to notice the commotion, some stopping to watch, while others pulled out their phones to record the interaction. For Jordan, the irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, a federal agent tasked with protecting the public, being treated like a suspect because of the color of her skin. Yet despite the absurdity of the situation, she remained calm, knowing that losing her temper wouldn't help, and might even make things worse. Little did Karen know, the tables were about to turn in a way she could never have anticipated. The tension in the air was palpable as Officer Karen Miller leaned closer to Jordan's car, her face inches from the open window. Her tone was sharp and unyielding, each word dripping with accusation. "I asked you a question," she barked, her voice rising above the hum of passing cars and distant chatter. "Why are you parked here? What are you doing?" Jordan Hayes took a deep breath, her training kicking in. She reminded herself to stay calm, even though every fiber of her being wanted to push back against the unfairness of the situation. With measured patience, she replied, "Officer, I'm just sitting here working. I'm not doing anything wrong." She gestured toward her laptop on the passenger seat, hoping it would serve as proof of her innocence. But Karen wasn't interested in evidence or reason. To her, Jordan's presence alone was enough to justify her suspicion. Karen crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "Working? On what?" she demanded, her eyes narrowing. Before Jordan could answer, Karen interrupted again. "You know what? Get out of the car. Now." The command came without explanation, leaving Jordan no choice but to comply if she wanted to avoid escalating the situation further. Slowly, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out of the vehicle, keeping her movements deliberate and non-threatening. As Jordan stood beside her car, Karen began circling her like a predator sizing up its prey. "Keep your hands where I can see them," Karen ordered, her hand hovering near her holster. Jordan raised her hand slightly, palms open, showing she posed no threat. "Ma'am, I'm happy to explain myself," Jordan said evenly, her voice steady despite the growing knot in her stomach. "But I'd appreciate it if you told me why you're stopping me." Karen scoffed, clearly irritated by Jordan's composure. "Don't play innocent with me," she shot back. "People don't just sit in their cars for no reason. Not around here. You're acting suspicious, and I need to figure out why." "Suspicious," Jordan thought to herself, biting back the urge to laugh at the absurdity of the accusation. If only Karen knew who she was dealing with. If only she realized that the person standing in front of her spent her days dismantling criminal networks and protecting lives. Ignoring Jordan's attempts to reason with her, Karen pressed on. "Turn around and put your hands on the car," she commanded. When Jordan hesitated for a split second, Karen's voice rose sharply. "Do it now." Reluctantly, Jordan did as she was told, placing her hands on the hood of her car. As Karen began patting her down, Jordan felt a surge of frustration mixed with disbelief. How had this escalated so quickly? All she'd been doing was her job, yet here she was, treated like a criminal simply because of the color of her skin. By now, a small crowd had gathered nearby. Some onlookers whispered among themselves, while others recorded the scene on their phones. One man muttered loud enough for everyone to hear, "This doesn't look right." Another woman shook her head, muttering something about profiling. The attention didn't seem to faze Karen. If anything, it made her more determined to prove she was in charge. As the frisk continued, Jordan decided it was time to reveal the truth. She glanced over her shoulder at Karen and said firmly, "Officer, I think you should check my credentials. I'm an FBI agent." For a moment, Karen froze, her hands hovering mid-motion. Then, almost instinctively, she dismissed the claim. "Yeah, sure you are," she sneered sarcastically. "Everyone says they're important when they get caught." Jordan sighed, realizing Karen wasn't going to take her word for it. "My badge is in my jacket pocket," she said calmly. "Please, check it." There was a long pause as Karen processed the request. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she reluctantly reached into Jordan's jacket and pulled out the badge and ID card tucked inside. As she examined the official insignia and photograph, her face went pale. It was unmistakable. Jordan Hayes was exactly who she claimed to be, a federal agent. For a brief moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Karen stammered, struggling to find words as the weight of her mistake crashed down on her. Meanwhile, the crowd murmured in disbelief, capturing the entire exchange on video. What had started as a routine stop had turned into something far bigger and far more revealing than anyone could have imagined. The moment Officer Karen Miller held Jordan Hayes' FBI badge in her trembling hands, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The shiny gold emblem and official identification card left no room for doubt. This wasn't just some random person. It was a federal agent. Yet instead of immediately apologizing or stepping back with humility, Karen froze, her face flushed with a mix of shock and embarrassment. For a split second, time seemed to stand still as she processed the magnitude of her error. Jordan stood tall, her posture unwavering despite the ordeal she had just endured. She watched silently as Karen struggled to regain control of the situation. Finally, Karen spoke, though her voice lacked its earlier confidence. I didn't know," she stammered, fumbling over her words. "You should have said something sooner." Her tone carried a hint of defensiveness, as if trying to shift some of the blame onto Jordan for not speaking up faster. Jordan raised an eyebrow, her calm demeanor unshaken. "I did tell you, officer," she replied evenly. But you weren't listening. Her voice was firm but measured, devoid of anger or malice. She knew there was no point in escalating things further. What mattered now was how this encounter would be handled moving forward. Still, her words landed like a punch, exposing the flaws in Karen's behavior and forcing her to confront the reality of what had just happened. Karen glanced around nervously, suddenly aware of the growing audience. Phones were pointed in their direction, capturing every awkward exchange. A few people whispered audibly, their disapproval evident. One man called out, "That's messed up," while another shook his head in disgust. The weight of public scrutiny began to press down on Karen, making her squirm under the collective gaze of judgment. It was clear that this incident wouldn't end here. It was already spilling into the court of public opinion. Realizing she needed to salvage whatever authority she had left, Karen attempted to justify her actions. "Look, I was just doing my job," she said, her voice rising slightly. "You can't blame me for being cautious. This is a high-crime area." Her attempt to rationalize her behavior fell flat, especially given the circumstances. Jordan simply stared at her, her expression unreadable. There was no need for her to argue. The evidence spoke for itself. After a long, uncomfortable pause, Karen handed the badge back to Jordan, avoiding eye contact. "Well, sorry for the inconvenience," she muttered half-heartedly, clearly hoping the apology would make everything go away. But Jordan wasn't satisfied with empty words. She took the badge without comment, slipping it back into her jacket pocket. Then, with quiet dignity, she turned toward her car, signaling that the interaction was over. As Jordan gathered her belongings and prepared to leave, Karen lingered nearby, visibly flustered. She seemed torn between wanting to explain herself and knowing she had dug too deep a hole to climb out of easily. Meanwhile, the crowd continued to murmur among themselves, many expressing outrage over what they had witnessed. Someone shouted, "This is why people don't trust cops," while another added, "She got what she deserved." Despite the chaos swirling around them, Jordan remained focused. As she closed her laptop and slid behind the wheel of her car, she allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. What had just happened was infuriating, yes, but it also presented an opportunity. An opportunity to shine a light on the systemic issues that allowed such encounters to happen in the first place. Before driving away, Jordan rolled down her window one last time and looked directly at Karen. "Officer," she said calmly, her voice cutting through the noise, "you might want to think about why you stopped me today, and whether your actions reflect the kind of officer you really want to be." With that, she started the engine and pulled away from the curb, leaving Karen standing alone amidst the murmurs of disapproval and the flashing lights of camera phones. As Jordan drove off, the gravity of the moment settled over her. She knew this wasn't just about her. It was about every person who had ever been treated unfairly because of prejudice, and she vowed, right then and there, to turn this painful experience into something meaningful. As Jordan Hayes drove away from the scene, her mind raced with thoughts about what had just transpired. The confrontation with Officer Karen Miller wasn't just a personal affront. It was a glaring example of the systemic issues that plagued law enforcement and society at large. But instead of letting anger consume her, Jordan chose to channel her emotions into action. She knew this moment could either be forgotten as another unfortunate incident or transformed into something powerful enough to spark change. That evening, Jordan sat in her living room, replaying the events in her head. She pulled up the videos posted online by bystanders who had recorded the encounter. The footage showed everything: the accusatory tone, the unnecessary frisk, the disbelief when her badge was revealed, and finally, Karen's awkward attempt to justify herself. Watching it all unfold again made Jordan's stomach churn, but it also fueled her resolve. These videos weren't just evidence of one officer's misconduct. They were proof of a much larger problem that needed addressing. Jordan decided to reach out to trusted allies within the FBI and civil rights organizations. She shared the videos along with a detailed account of what had happened, emphasizing how such incidents eroded trust between communities and law enforcement. Her colleagues were shocked and outraged, not only because she was a fellow agent, but because they recognized the broader implications of the situation. One friend from the bureau said, "This can't just slide under the rug, Jordan. People need to see this." With their support, Jordan began crafting a plan. Rather than seeking revenge or demanding immediate punishment for Karen, she focused on exposing the root causes behind the incident. She wanted to use her platform to educate others and push for meaningful reforms. Over the next few days, she collaborated with advocacy groups to draft press releases and social media posts highlighting the dangers of racial profiling. They emphasized the importance of accountability and urged people to speak out against injustice whenever they witnessed it. But Jordan didn't stop there. She reached out to local community leaders, inviting them to join forces in organizing workshops aimed at empowering citizens. These sessions would teach participants about their rights during police encounters and provide strategies for de-escalating tense situations. Jordan believed education was key. If more people understood how to assert themselves calmly and confidently, fewer incidents like hers might occur. Behind the scenes, Jordan also worked to ensure Officer Karen Miller faced appropriate consequences. Though Karen had tried to brush off the incident with a weak apology, Jordan knew that accountability mattered. She provided a formal statement to the police department's Internal Affairs Division, detailing every aspect of the encounter. She included timestamps from the video footage, ensuring investigators couldn't dismiss her claims as mere hearsay. As word spread about the incident, public outrage grew. News outlets picked up the story, amplifying calls for justice. Protesters gathered outside the police station, holding signs that read, "Accountability starts here," and "End racial profiling now." Even some officers spoke out, acknowledging that Karen's actions were unacceptable and calling for better training within their ranks. Through it all, Jordan remained composed, refusing to let bitterness take hold. She understood that real change wouldn't happen overnight, but she was determined to keep pushing forward. Every email she sent, every meeting she attended, and every workshop she helped organize brought her closer to her goal. A world where no one would have to endure what she had gone through simply because of the color of their skin. By the time she turned off her laptop late that night, Jordan felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about creating a legacy of fairness and equality. And as she drifted off to sleep, she reminded herself of one thing. Even in the face of adversity, courage and determination could turn pain into progress. The days following the incident quickly turned into a whirlwind of activity for Jordan Hayes. What had started as a personal encounter with prejudice soon became a national conversation about racial profiling and police accountability. Social media platforms exploded with hashtags like #JusticeForJordan and #EndRacialProfiling, drawing attention not only to her story, but also to countless others who had faced similar treatment. Videos of the confrontation went viral, racking up millions of views and sparking heated debates across news channels, talk shows, and community forums. Jordan's collaboration with civil rights organizations proved instrumental in amplifying the message. Together, they launched an online campaign that combined storytelling with calls to action. They shared testimonials from individuals who had experienced racial profiling, creating a mosaic of voices demanding change. Each story added weight to Jordan's experience, showing that this wasn't an isolated event. It was part of a pattern that needed to be addressed. Local leaders began taking notice. City council members called emergency meetings to discuss police reform, while school districts announced plans to incorporate anti-bias training into their curriculums. Even some members of law enforcement stepped forward, acknowledging the need for better communication and understanding between officers and the communities they served. One veteran officer wrote an op-ed in a local newspaper, admitting, "We have work to do. This isn't about one bad apple. It's about fixing the system so no one feels targeted because of their race." Meanwhile, Officer Karen Miller found herself at the center of a storm she couldn't escape. The backlash grew louder by the day, with people calling for her dismissal and greater transparency in how such cases were handled. Her department launched an internal investigation, promising to review body camera footage and interview witnesses. But leaks suggested the process was more about protecting the institution than holding individuals accountable. This infuriated Jordan, who knew that half-hearted measures wouldn't bring real change. Determined to keep the pressure on, Jordan decided to file a formal complaint with the Department of Justice. She provided investigators with every piece of evidence available: the videos, witness statements, and even screenshots of discriminatory remarks Karen had allegedly made in the past. By involving federal authorities, Jordan hoped to ensure that the case wouldn't disappear quietly after public interest faded. She understood that systemic problems required systemic solutions, and she was willing to fight for as long as it took. Public support continued to pour in, bolstering Jordan's efforts. Protesters organized peaceful demonstrations outside police stations, chanting slogans like "No justice, no peace," and "Hold them accountable." Community activists set up donation drives to fund legal aid for victims of racial profiling, ensuring that those without resources could still seek justice. Artists painted murals depicting Jordan as a symbol of resilience, turning city walls into canvases of hope and defiance. Amidst all the chaos, Jordan stayed grounded, focusing on her mission rather than the spotlight. She attended town hall meetings, speaking alongside families who had lost loved ones to police brutality. She listened intently to their stories, nodding in solidarity as tears streamed down cheeks and voices cracked under the weight of grief. These moments reminded her why she had chosen this path: to honor those who couldn't speak for themselves, and to create a future where no one would suffer in silence. As weeks passed, the momentum showed no signs of slowing. Schools invited Jordan to give talks about overcoming adversity and standing up for what's right. Churches hosted prayer vigils dedicated to healing and unity. Even celebrities joined the cause, using their platforms to amplify Jordan's message. It was clear that something powerful had been unleashed, a movement driven not just by anger, but by hope for a better tomorrow. Through it all, Jordan remained steadfast. She knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but she also knew she wasn't alone. Every person sharing her story, every voice joining the chorus for change, gave her strength. And though Officer Karen Miller's fate still hung in the balance, Jordan understood that true victory wouldn't come from punishing one individual. It would come from dismantling the systems that allowed such injustices to happen in the first place. With each passing day, Jordan's resolve deepened. This wasn't just her battle anymore. It belonged to everyone who believed in fairness, equality, and justice, and she was ready to see it through, no matter what. Jordan Hayes wasted no time turning the momentum of her story into action. With public support at an all-time high, she channeled the energy from protests and online campaigns into tangible initiatives aimed at creating lasting change. Her first step was organizing a series of community workshops titled "Know Your Rights," building bridges between citizens and law enforcement. These events were designed to educate people on how to handle interactions with police officers while advocating for respectful and fair treatment. The workshops quickly gained traction. Held in schools, libraries, and community centers, they attracted diverse crowds: families, students, activists, and even some open-minded law enforcement officers eager to learn. Jordan led many of these sessions herself, sharing not only her expertise as an FBI agent, but also her personal experiences. She walked participants through scenarios, offering practical advice like staying calm during stops, knowing when to ask for legal representation, and documenting incidents if things escalated. Her calm demeanor and relatable storytelling made complex topics accessible, leaving attendees feeling empowered rather than intimidated. One particularly moving moment came during a workshop in a predominantly black neighborhood. A young woman named Maya stood up and shared her own story of being pulled over without cause. Her voice trembled as she recounted the fear she felt, but it grew stronger as she thanked Jordan for giving her tools to protect herself in the future. "I didn't know I had rights before this," Maya said, clutching a pamphlet provided at the event. Now I feel like I can stand up for myself, and maybe help someone else too. Beyond the workshops, Jordan collaborated with advocacy groups to push for legislative changes. She met with lawmakers, presenting data and real-life examples that highlighted the urgent need for reform. Together, they drafted proposals calling for mandatory de-escalation training for officers, stricter guidelines around profiling, and independent oversight committees to review complaints against law enforcement. Jordan's testimony carried immense weight, not just because of her credentials, but because of the humanity she brought to the table. Lawmakers listened intently as she described the emotional toll of racial profiling, urging them to see the issue not as abstract policy, but as something affecting real lives every day. Her efforts extended online as well. Jordan partnered with influencers and educators to create short, engaging videos explaining key concepts about civil rights and police accountability. These clips spread across social media platforms, reaching audiences far beyond those who could attend in-person events. One video, featuring Jordan calmly breaking down what to do if stopped by police, went viral overnight, earning praise for its clarity and usefulness. Comments poured in from viewers expressing gratitude, saying things like, "This is exactly what we needed," and "Thank you for making this so easy to understand." Behind the scenes, Jordan worked tirelessly to hold Officer Karen Miller accountable. Though internal investigations often dragged their feet, Jordan kept pushing, ensuring the case stayed in the public eye. She submitted additional evidence, including expert analyses of Karen's past behavior and patterns of misconduct. When leaks suggested the department might let Karen off lightly, Jordan responded by releasing a statement reminding everyone why accountability mattered. "This isn't about revenge," she wrote. "It's about sending a message that no one is above the law, not even those sworn to uphold it." As weeks turned into months, Jordan's relentless advocacy began bearing fruit. Local officials announced plans to implement body cameras for all officers, a move celebrated by activists as a step toward transparency. Schools adopted anti-bias curriculums inspired by her workshops, teaching children early on about fairness and respect. Even within police departments, whispers of change started emerging, with some officers admitting privately that Jordan's campaign had forced them to reevaluate their own practices. Through it all, Jordan remained humble, crediting the movement's success to the countless individuals who supported her along the way. At a press conference marking 6 months since the incident, she addressed the crowd with tears in her eyes. "This isn't my victory. It's ours," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion in the room. Every person who spoke out, donated, or simply shared a post played a part in this. And we're not done yet. Though challenges still lay ahead, Jordan's determination never wavered. She knew the fight for justice was far from over. But with each new policy passed, each life touched, and each mind changed, she saw proof that progress was possible. And she vowed to keep going until equality wasn't just a dream, but a reality for everyone. The culmination of Jordan Hayes' relentless efforts began to take shape as accountability finally caught up with Officer Karen Miller. The internal investigation, which had initially seemed sluggish and dismissive, gained momentum under mounting public pressure. Leaked documents revealed that Karen had a troubling history of discriminatory behavior, including multiple complaints from citizens who accused her of racial profiling and excessive force. These revelations painted a damning picture, leaving little room for the department to shield her any longer. After weeks of scrutiny, the police chief held a press conference to announce the outcome of the investigation. With cameras rolling and reporters scribbling furiously, he declared that Officer Karen Miller would be suspended without pay and required to undergo mandatory sensitivity training. While some viewed this as a step in the right direction, others, including Jordan, felt it wasn't enough. "Sensitivity training won't fix systemic issues," she told a local journalist during an interview. "We need real consequences and lasting reforms." Determined to push further, Jordan escalated the matter by filing a formal complaint with the Department of Justice. She argued that Karen's actions weren't just an isolated mistake, but part of a broader pattern of misconduct that demanded federal oversight. Her detailed submission included evidence from the viral videos, witness testimonies, and documented instances of Karen's past behavior. This bold move put additional pressure on both the police department and government officials to act decisively. Public outrage continued to grow, fueled by activists and community leaders who rallied behind Jordan's call for justice. Protesters marched through the streets, holding signs that read, "Hold them accountable," and "Justice shouldn't be optional." Social media campaigns amplified the message, ensuring the story stayed in the spotlight. Celebrities and influencers joined the chorus, using their platforms to demand action. One popular musician even dedicated a song to Jordan at a sold-out concert, calling her courage a beacon of hope for us all. Facing insurmountable pressure, Officer Karen Miller eventually resigned from the force. In a terse statement released through her lawyer, she claimed the stress of the situation had become untenable. Though her resignation marked a small victory, Jordan knew it was only one piece of a much larger puzzle. True justice meant addressing the root causes that allowed such incidents to happen in the first place, and she was determined to see that through. In response to the outcry, local officials announced sweeping reforms within the police department. Body cameras became mandatory for all officers, with strict penalties for failing to activate them during interactions. Independent oversight committees were established to review complaints of misconduct, ensuring investigations remained impartial. De-escalation training programs were expanded, emphasizing empathy and cultural awareness. Schools also adopted new curriculums focused on teaching students about equality, fairness, and civic responsibility. Jordan played a pivotal role in shaping these changes, attending meetings with city council members and testifying before legislative bodies. Her calm yet forceful demeanor left a lasting impression on those involved in the decision-making process. At one particularly heated session, a council member challenged her suggestions, arguing they were too costly or impractical. Without missing a beat, Jordan responded, "What's the cost of losing trust in our communities? What's the price of someone's dignity?" The room fell silent, and the reforms moved forward. As news of the reforms spread, people began to feel a cautious sense of optimism. Families expressed relief knowing their loved ones might now face fewer unjust encounters with law enforcement. Activists celebrated the progress while vowing to remain vigilant, understanding that change required constant effort. Even some officers admitted privately that the reforms were long overdue, acknowledging that rebuilding trust would benefit everyone. For Jordan, the journey was far from over. Though proud of what had been achieved, she recognized that true transformation took time. As she stood outside City Hall after the final reform vote, surrounded by supporters chanting her name, she raised a hand to quiet the crowd. "This is a win for all of us," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "But let's not stop here. Let's keep pushing for a world where no one has to fight for basic respect and equality." With renewed determination, Jordan turned her focus to the next phase of her mission, taking the movement national. If one incident could spark so much change in one community, imagine what could happen if similar efforts spread across the country. For Jordan Hayes, this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something bigger. Months after the incident with Officer Karen Miller, Jordan Hayes stood on stage at a national conference dedicated to racial equity and law enforcement reform. The auditorium was packed, filled with activists, policymakers, educators, and even some law enforcement officials eager to learn from her journey. As she looked out at the sea of faces, she felt a mix of emotions, pride in how far they'd come, but also a deep awareness of the work still ahead. Jordan began her speech by recounting the day that changed everything: the confrontation, the humiliation, and the realization that this wasn't just about her. "That moment wasn't mine alone," she said, her voice steady yet warm. "It belonged to every person who has ever been treated unfairly because of the color of their skin, their accent, or the way they dress. It reminded me that while laws are important, real change starts with people, how we treat each other, how we listen, and how we stand up when something is wrong. The audience hung on her every word as she described the whirlwind that followed. The viral videos, the protests, the workshops, and the policy changes. She spoke candidly about the challenges, how exhausting it was to relive the trauma over and over, how frustrating it was to face resistance from those unwilling to admit there was a problem. But she also highlighted the moments of hope. The young woman named Maya who found her voice at a workshop, the officers who reached out to thank her for opening their eyes, and the countless strangers who sent messages of support. What kept me going, Jordan continued, was remembering why I started this fight, not for revenge, not for fame, but for justice. Justice isn't just about punishing bad behavior. It's about creating a world where everyone feels safe, respected, and valued. She paused, letting her words sink in before sharing a story that had deeply impacted her. A mother had approached her after one of her talks, tears streaming down her face, and thanked her for giving her son tools to protect himself during traffic stops. "Ma'am," the woman had said, "you saved my boy's life without ever meeting him." Jordan went on to outline her vision for the future, a future where communities and law enforcement work together as partners rather than adversaries. She called for nationwide adoption of body cameras, independent oversight boards, and mandatory anti-bias training. She urged schools to teach children early about empathy and equality, planting seeds of understanding that would grow into a more compassionate society. And she challenged everyone in the room to take action, no matter how small. "Change doesn't happen overnight," she said. "But if we all do our part, we can build a better tomorrow." Her speech ended with a powerful call to unity. "We're stronger together," she declared, her voice rising with conviction. This isn't about pointing fingers or assigning blame. It's about lifting each other up. It's about saying, "Enough is enough," and working side by side to fix what's broken. Because when we come together, there's nothing we can't achieve. The room erupted into applause, a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. People cheered, clapped, and wiped away tears, inspired by Jordan's courage and determination. Afterward, dozens lined up to speak with her, sharing their own stories and pledging to join the movement. One elderly man handed her a folded piece of paper. Inside was a simple message: "Thank you for being the light in the darkness." In the months that followed, Jordan traveled across the country, speaking at conferences, universities, and community events. Her story became a catalyst for nationwide discussions about policing, accountability, and systemic racism. Cities began implementing reforms modeled after the one she helped create, proving that grassroots efforts could spark monumental change. Activists credited her with reigniting a sense of urgency around civil rights, while law enforcement leaders acknowledged her role in bridging divides between their departments and the communities they served. Though the road remained long, Jordan never lost sight of her mission. She knew setbacks would come and new battles would arise. But she also knew she wasn't alone. Every person inspired by her story, every policy passed, and every mind changed fueled her belief that progress was possible. As she sat on a plane heading to her next destination, Jordan reflected on how far she'd come since that fateful day near the convenience store. What had started as an act of profiling had transformed into a movement, a testament to the power of resilience, compassion, and collective action. She smiled softly, closing her eyes for a moment. No matter what lay ahead, one thing was certain: Jordan Hayes would keep fighting. For justice, for equality, and for a world where everyone could live without fear of judgment based on the color of their skin.